Miss Lena, please accept my condolences. This was the sentence I heard most throughout the night. I sat on a bench in the hospital corridor, my face ashen and my gaze vacant as I stared into the distance, still cradling in my arms an infant whose eyes were tightly shut and who had ceased breathing. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. Moments later, a dark figure appeared before me. Only when that familiar voice rang out was my mind finally pulled back to reality. Lena, what on earth happened? How could something happen to a perfectly healthy child? Facing his questioning, I slowly raised my head to look at Adrian. He was breathing heavily, his brows furrowed, glaring at me with confusion and anger. The moment I saw him, my eyes stung, and the tears I had held back all night finally spilled over. Where were you? His mouth opened and closed several times, yet he could not give me an answer. It was only when the glaring streak of bright red lipstick on Adrian's collar caught my eye, accompanied by the scent of narrowly perfume drifting into my nose, that I understood he had spent the previous night with Tanya. 5 years ago, Adrian's breakup with the hugely popular actress Tanya became explosive news overnight. Yet not long afterward, he proposed to my parents. I knew he had married me only out of spite toward Tanya. At the time, however, my family was on the verge of bankruptcy, and faced with a man of such refined appearance and extraordinary ability, a veritable unattainable flower on a high peak, I still fell for him fully aware of the circumstances. After marriage, Adrian was completely different from what I had imagined. He treated me extremely well. Both in public and in private, he gave me more love than I had ever expected, so I always believed he truly loved me. That was until Tanya returned to the country a month ago. Gradually, his social engagements increased, and he stopped coming home as often, yet that was precisely when I had just given birth to our child. My thoughts flashed back. I took a deep breath, gave a bitter smile, and slowly stood up, the dense pain in my heart having nowhere to go. Last night I had a business engagement and drank too much, so. Adrian, do you know how long Yo-Yo cried last night? I suddenly interrupted him, my eyes red as I looked at him with a calm yet desperate expression. Until the very second she stopped breathing. She was so little, only 1 month old in this world. You knew full well I was still in postpartum confinement and extremely weak. You knew the doctor had warned from the moment she was born that she required careful attention. Why couldn't you, for the sake of your own daughter, even answer a single phone call? Do you have any idea how desperate I felt watching her die in my arms? He was rendered speechless by my questions. Adrian let out a helpless sigh, looked up at me with impatience, and said, Lena, Yo-Yo is gone, what more do you want from me? I already told you I was drunk last night and didn't hear the phone. If you don't believe me, ask my assistant. She was my child too. I'm hurting no less than you are. Do you have to interrogate me right now? By the end he roared, his hands clenched at his sides until the knuckles cracked. Watching him lie so brazenly pierced my heart like a dagger, tears once again slid silently down my face. While Yo-Yo was dying, you were busy being intimate with Tanya. I am your wife, why can't I question you? At that, Adrian's expression froze, a flash of embarrassment at being exposed crossed his face, but the next second he arrogantly shot back, yes, I was with her, so what? You're perfectly healthy, why couldn't you get Yo-Yo to the hospital in time? Why couldn't you save her even though you were right there? Is postpartum confinement really such a fragile excuse? If I'm an unfit father, then you're hardly a better mother. With that, Adrian snatched Yo-Yo's body from my arms and strode out of the hospital without looking back. Adrian! Give her back to me! I screamed with all the anguish in my soul, only to black out the next second and collapse straight to the floor. Yo-Yo's funeral was kept quiet, only both sets of parents and a few close friends came to the house to pay their respects. After I fainted in the hospital that day, the doctor warned me, Miss Lena, you are suffering from severe emotional depression combined with extremely poor physical condition, you must take better care of your health. You can have more children in the future. Yet Yo-Yo's departure is a lifelong pain for me. At the moment my marriage was betrayed, her arrival had given me hope, now I could only watch helplessly as she died in my arms. I blamed Adrian for not answering the phone, and I blamed myself for being unable to save her. Downstairs, people came and went, while upstairs I silently wept, clutching Yo-Yo's tiny clothes. I don't know how long I cried like that, but in a daze I heard someone climb the stairs and enter the room next door. I drew a breath, slowly stood up, and prepared to go see who it was. To my shock, the moment I reached the door I glimpsed through the narrow gap Tanya being held tightly in Adrian's arms. "Adrian, I know you're grieving." Tanya soothed him in an extremely gentle tone, her eyes full of heartache. "I was also at fault that night. If I hadn't gotten drunk and insisted on keeping you with me, maybe your child wouldn't have died." At this, she choked up and hugged Adrian even tighter. "But you know I can't live without you. Don't worry, you'll have more children in the future. I will definitely bear you a daughter even cuter than she was." Hearing these words, the rage inside me reached its zenith. I had known Tanya was shameless enough to be a third party, but I never imagined such repulsive words could come from a human mouth. Just as my blood surged and I nearly charged in, Adrian spoke. He let out a long sigh, then gently patted Tanya's back. "Tang Tang, this isn't your fault, you just needed me too much, that's all. I know the years you spent abroad weren't easy, my heart aches for you." His words were like a long nail that pinned my feet in place, the sourness and pain in my heart were momentarily indescribable. If he could never let go of Tanya, why had he treated me so well these past 5 years? And why, while never forgetting her, had he refused to seek her out, letting things escalate to this point? Before I could voice these questions, Adrian's next words plunged me into an icy abyss. "I truly am sad that Yo-Yo is gone, she was, after all, my first child, and there was a time when I eagerly anticipated her birth. But ever since you came back to my side, I've not only grown to resent Lena, sometimes I even found the child she bore me an eyesore." At this, he let out a low, mocking laugh. "Yet whenever I think that without those shackles I can love you freely, a secret joy rises in my heart. Tell me, am I not utterly heartless?" With a loud bang, the instant after Adrian uttered those words, my mind went blank. Without the slightest hesitation, I hurled the phone in my hand straight at his head. Tanya let out a shrill scream at the sudden attack. I, however, thought nothing at all. I stormed into the room, seized Adrian by the collar, and slapped him hard across the face. "Are you even human? How could you say something so utterly devoid of conscience? Yo-Yo's body is still lying cold downstairs." I wailed with soul-rending grief, clutching him tightly as if ready to fight him to the death. Yet the difference in strength between men and women, combined with my still weak postpartum body, meant that after a few struggles he easily shoved me away. Tanya immediately threw herself into his arms, eyes red with distress, and asked, "Are you all right, Adrian?" Adrian shook his head and glared at me with sinister eyes. "Lena, you've truly gone mad." I let out a low, cold laugh and replied indifferently, "Yes, to have loved a devil like you for 5 whole years, I really must be insane." Then I turned to Tanya and asked with biting sarcasm, "Miss Tanya, today is the day of my daughter's funeral. Coming to my house on this day to tangle with my husband, aren't you afraid of divine retribution?" At that, Tanya froze for a moment, then lifted her chin with a hint of smug triumph. "Lena, I'm not going to stoop to your level just because you've lost a child. But let me tell you, in love, the one who isn't loved is the real third party. Adrian never loved you. If I were you, I'd know better than to cling on and would divorce him right now." The moment those words left her mouth, the atmosphere turned deathly still. I swept a cold glance over them both, finally fixing my gaze on Adrian. "She's right, we should indeed divorce." I wasn't sure if I imagined it, but for a fleeting second when he heard those words, a trace of panic flashed across his eyes. Yet the very next second, he wrapped his arm around Tanya and laughed carelessly. "Even if divorce is mentioned, it's not your place to say it first. Lena, if you had just stayed quiet and obedient, out of pity I would have continued supporting you and the Fong family. But you've been utterly unreasonable. The only one who stands to lose from a divorce is you, not me. I'll be waiting for the day you regret this and realize your mistake." As if I had just heard a hilarious joke, I looked at Adrian, who was brimming with confidence, and sneered, "The only reason you're so certain of yourself is because you know how deeply I've loved you all these years. But remember this, the depth of love can turn into an equal depth of hatred. Sooner or later, you will pay the price for every word you uttered today." Only then did I turn my gaze to Tanya, who was nestled pitifully in his arms. "And you too." With those words, I turned and left that suffocating place without looking back. News of my divorce from Adrian spread rapidly through our social circle. Some praised me for being decisive and letting go cleanly, others ridiculed me for my stupidity. After all, everyone knew how crucial it was to stay on good terms with Adrian in New York. Some even secretly messaged me in secret, "Just lower your head, apologize, and play the card of the child you just lost. Who knows, Adrian might soften and give you unexpected benefits." It was only a full-term baby, was it really worth making such a fuss? Yes, just a full-term baby. In their eyes, a 1-month-old fetus, or even a child raised to adolescence, remained nothing more than a bargaining chip. But I refused to be that shameless. After the divorce, I retreated to a mountain temple for a month, living on vegetarian meals and chanting sutras, the least I could do for Yo-Yo in the end. During that time, I racked my brains trying to figure out how to make Adrian and Tanya pay the price they deserved. Just when I saw no way forward, Hector appeared. The black Bentley glided to a smooth stop in front of the venue for the 20th Berlin International Film Festival Gala. I glanced at the flashing cameras outside the window, gently pushed the door open, and prepared to step out. Yet the instant I rose, a hand with distinct knuckles suddenly seized my wrist. I turned and gradually discerned, beneath the dim light, that refined, elegant, and breathtakingly handsome face. "Lena, I'll wait for you." His low, magnetic voice resonated inside the narrow cabin. As he spoke, Hector's deep eyes seemed to bore a hole straight through me. With those words, he casually placed a black key card on my lap. Only then did he release my hand and allow me to alight. I pocketed the card, stepped out in silence, and walked slowly into the banquet hall. Hector and I had met only twice before. The first time was on that rainy night when Yo-Yo died. I was frantically rushing her to the hospital, cradling her tiny body, with not a single car in sight, until Hector appeared and took us there. Back then, I didn't even recognize him. The second time was at the temple on South Mountain, where he had come to offer incense, and we met again by chance. Long before that, however, I had heard his name countless times from Adrian's own mouth. In New York, Hector and Adrian were both celebrated young tycoons. They had clashed numerous times in business, and Adrian often complained that Hector was cunning and full of schemes. I had assumed our paths would never cross again. Yet one late night, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Hector was lounging lazily against the frame. Before I could speak, he asked softly, "Lena, don't you want Adrian and Tanya to pay the price they deserve?" He chuckled lightly, stepped inside with long strides, clasped my chin, and smiled seductively. "Lena, I can help you. My fee isn't high, 1 is more than enough." My thoughts snapped back to the present. I was already seated among the jury. A familiar voice sounded behind me. Tanya, dressed in an opulent gown, approached step by step, with Adrian cautiously supporting her, completely ignoring the gossipy stares around them. After all, news of their rekindled romance had dominated trending topics lately, and, more importantly, many people knew he had abandoned his wife of 5 years for Tanya's sake. "How come it's you?" Just as Tanya was about to sit, she noticed me. I turned with an indifferent smile and said casually, "Long time no see, Miss Tanya." This time, before Tanya could reply, Adrian froze, then lunged to grab my arm. "Lena, I know you hate Tang Tang, but today is the day she wins Best Actress. I will not let you ruin it." As he spoke, he tried to drag me outside. I gritted my teeth, flung his hand away, and snapped angrily, "Let go. I'm a jury member today." My words stunned both Adrian and Tanya. At that exact moment, the host on stage spoke. "Who will take home the Best Actress award at the 20th Berlin International Film Festival?" We now invite our 7 jury members to choose one of the 4 nominees. Hearing this, I stopped struggling with Adrian, turned around, and pressed the button for one of the 4 nominees. The next second, the winner appeared on the giant screen. Tanya, who had been certain of victory, went pale and collapsed into her seat, muttering incessantly, "Best Actress should have been mine. I've fought for this title for so many years." Even Adrian was shocked by my position. He looked at the nameplate on my table and asked in confusion, "Wasn't the seat supposed to be Hector's? Why is it you?" "Lena. Explain yourself." Watching him unravel, I gave a cold snort, leaned close to his ear, and whispered, "I know you spent a fortune trying to buy the Best Actress title for Tanya. Unfortunately, your money was utterly wasted." Seeing suspicion and rigidity overtake his face, an inexplicable thrill of pleasure surged within me. But this was only the beginning. Leaving the venue, I headed straight to the W Hotel. Throughout the drive, I gazed at the buildings receding outside the window, my emotions a tangled storm. The key card in my hand felt like a burning coal. I had come to terms with whatever lingered between Adrian and Tanya. After all, I was the one who had knowingly drowned in that love, and I should have foreseen this day. Yet every time I recalled their words, hatred inevitably flared, and I could not allow them to live carefree as if nothing had happened. The car soon stopped in front of the hotel. I took a deep breath, went upstairs. Hector might not be a good man either, but for now I could use him to achieve my goal. That was enough. Standing before Suite 8888, I hesitated for a long while. Just as I raised my hand to knock, the door suddenly opened from inside. Hector stood there in a bathrobe, gently swirling a glass of red wine. Droplets of water still fell occasionally from the tips of his hair. He curved his lips into a smile. "What's wrong? Afraid I'll devour you, so you hesitate to come in?" Hearing that, I clenched my fists at my sides, but finally took a deep breath, raised my eyes to him, and declared, "Since I dared to come, what is there to fear?" With that, I brushed past him and entered the suite on my own. A low chuckle from Hector sounded behind me. I walked past the living room of the presidential suite and went straight into the bedroom, turning my back to unzip my dress before he entered. Yet just as I had pulled the zipper down a fraction, a cool touch covered my hand. Hector had silently appeared behind me. Smiling softly, he pulled the zipper back up and said in a low voice, "No rush. Lena, I'm willing to give you time to prepare." Startled, I turned to face him. "Hector, I know that from tonight onward I'll owe you a debt. But as long as I can make them pay, I don't need to wait." Hector did not reply immediately. He simply gazed down at me with smiling eyes for a long while, then caressed my cheek and teased, "I had no idea you were in such a hurry. Could it be you've fancied me for a long time?" I shot him an annoyed glare, turned to pick up my bag from the bed. "If you don't need anything, then I'll leave." Before I could finish, an arm suddenly encircled my waist. Hector rested his chin on my shoulder, closed his eyes, and said slowly, "Don't go. Just stay and keep me company tonight. I promise I won't do anything." For some reason my heart skipped a beat at those words, and my body stiffened. I let Hector hold me quietly for a long while until an urgent ringtone snapped me back to reality. From a distance I saw the caller ID blazing Adrian. Just as I reached to hang up, Hector picked up the phone first and answered. "Lena, aren't you going to explain what happened tonight? Why are you able to vote on behalf of Hector? Or have you two been secretly involved behind my back all along?" Adrian's dark, sinister voice came through the receiver. Just as I was about to speak, Hector suddenly covered my mouth. He abruptly pulled me onto the bed to sit down and spoke lazily. "President Adrian always calls so late at night, he's really ruining the moment." The other end fell into a long silence, and the next second Adrian roared, "Hector? Where's Lena? Get that damn woman on the phone." Compared to Adrian's raging fury, Hector looked utterly relaxed. The smile at the corner of his mouth deepened as he turned to look at me, my mouth still covered, and suddenly leaned in to kiss me before I could react. I instinctively closed my eyes. Then I suddenly remembered that Hector was still covering my mouth, so he couldn't actually reach my lips. When I opened my eyes, I saw him pressing an affectionate kiss to the back of his own hand. We were so close that we could feel each other's faint breath. The scene carried an indescribable intimacy. Especially Hector's eyes, brimming with desire, which I couldn't meet his gaze at all. "Speak. Put Lena on the phone." Adrian's furious shouting continued unabated. Hector curled his lips into a smile, pulled back slightly, picked up the phone, and said calmly, "Her mouth is occupied right now, so I'm afraid she can't take President Adrian's call. If you have anything to say, I'll be sure to pass it on to her later." At these words, Adrian abandoned mere rage and descended into unrestrained profanity. Hector paid it no mind and casually tossed the phone aside. He stared straight at me, his eyes filled with extremely complicated emotions. While I was lost in a daze, he released his hand from my mouth, grasped the back of my head, and kissed me deeply. This time, nothing stood in the way. I clearly felt his cold, thin lips. When I woke up, Hector was no longer beside me. Last night, apart from that fleeting, dragonfly-like kiss, nothing else happened between us. He simply held me all night. On the way home from the hotel, Hector sent me a message: "Business trip for 3 days. I'm going to City A to snatch the project Adrian wants. Wait for my good news." The message felt both like a notification and a report. This suddenly reminded me of the 5 years I spent with Adrian. Although he treated me well, he never once reported or shared anything about his life with me. Back then I was so immersed in it that I never noticed how superficial his kindness actually was. I was clearly his wife, yet I always seemed to exist outside his world. With a ding, the elevator doors opened. I gathered my thoughts and stepped out, but the next second I clearly saw the man standing at my apartment door. Hearing the noise, Adrian, who had been staring at the floor, slowly raised his head to look at me. He no longer carried his usual refined elegance, even his tie and collar were disheveled. I looked at him, took a deep breath, walked over, and said coldly, "Adrian, you shouldn't be here." As if he'd heard a joke, he sneered disdainfully and asked, "Then who should be here?" "Hector?" Facing this nonsensical question, I frowned and had no intention of answering. But the moment I raised my hand to unlock the door with my fingerprint, Adrian suddenly grabbed my neck like a madman, shoved me inside, and quickly slammed the door shut. "What are you doing? Let me go." I struggled desperately, slapping him countless times in the chaos. Yet Adrian acted as if nothing had happened. He slammed me against the wall, eyes bloodshot, and asked darkly, "Did you sleep with him?" I didn't answer. He shook my shoulders violently and roared, "Speak. Lena, we've only been divorced for 2 months, Yo-Yo has only been gone for 2 months, and you're already with another man?" I couldn't believe he had the audacity to ask such a question. I used all my strength to shove Adrian away. "How do you have the face to ask that? What about you? You and Tanya were together before we were even divorced, before Yo-Yo had even passed away. What does that make you? Adrian, what right do you have to question me? Nothing happened between me and her," he roared, then sneered coldly, "Didn't you love me the most? How could you so easily throw yourself into another man's arms? Lena, didn't you love me the most? Don't forget who pulled your Fong family out of the mud back then." During the 5 years we were married, Adrian's emotions had always been stable. I had never seen any major mood swings from him. But now, he was like a lunatic. He had clearly made countless mistakes himself, yet he kept trying to paint me as the guilty one. In the past, I might have humbly begged him not to be angry anymore or explained tirelessly, but now there was absolutely no need. Everything that had happened today was because of him. I took a deep breath to steady myself. "Get out. This is my home. Don't you love Tanya to death? Then what is this interrogation about?" Perhaps my indifferent attitude stung him, a trace of loss and confusion flashed in his eyes. As if he couldn't understand how I could stop loving him so easily. After a long silence, he lowered his head and chuckled softly. "Lena, you're not doing this to make me change my mind and come back to you, are you?" He raised his eyes to look at me, full of sarcasm. "Unfortunately, you've chosen the wrong tactic. I don't fall for that. While speaking, Adrian straightened his rumpled clothes and continued in a warning tone, "Don't say I didn't warn you. Someone like Hector is not a man you can afford to provoke. Even if you're really trying to get revenge on me, you've picked the wrong person." Hearing such confident words, I felt no ripple in my heart. I nodded nonchalantly. "Think whatever you want. But Adrian, you're overthinking one thing. I stopped loving you long ago, how could I possibly hope you'd come back to me? Aren't you a little too self-confident?" At these words, the smile on his lips froze. The next second he returned to normal. "I don't believe you loved me for 5 whole years, you can't have fallen out of love that quickly. We'll find out soon enough whether I'm too confident or you're just being stubborn." Time flew by, and several days passed in the blink of an eye. The city lights glittered outside the window. I sat on the sofa, gently stroking the porcelain jar in my hands. It contained a lock of Yo-Yo's hair, my final spiritual connection to her. The phone on the coffee table suddenly lit up. I looked over, it was Hector calling. Now that I thought about it, today was the day he was returning from his business trip. I carefully put away the jar, picked up the phone, and answered. "Pack your things. I'll have the driver come pick you up right away." Before I could say anything, he hung up. I stared at the screen in confusion for a while, but eventually got up and changed my clothes. When the car stopped at Fengting Mansion, I realized this was where Hector lived. It wasn't far from the house Adrian and I used to share, which explained why Hector had appeared outside our complex that rainy night. "Miss Lena, please come in," his assistant greeted me. I nodded and followed him inside. Unlike the ostentatious luxury of most wealthy people's homes, the first impression of Hector's place was cold, an inhospitable, lifeless chill. Walking through the entryway into the living room, I immediately spotted Hector busy in the kitchen. He turned around and saw me. "Go wash your hands. Dinner's ready." I was momentarily stunned, it was rare to see such a busy man cook personally. By the time all the dishes were served, I had washed my hands and was seated at the table. Hector poured me a glass of orange juice but poured wine for himself. Puzzled, I asked, "Are you planning to drink alone and brood?" He smiled at that and teased, "A certain someone loses control after drinking, it's better if she abstains." His words left me confused. After all, Hector and I had never drunk together, yet he was clearly referring to me. I didn't dwell on it and simply took a sip of orange juice. "The City A project has been successfully secured. I imagine Adrian is still completely in the dark," Hector said casually. "I've snatched many projects from him before, but this time my feelings are entirely different." He took a light sip of wine, smiled faintly, then raised his eyes to me. "I wonder if it's because of you." Though it was an ordinary sentence, it made my heart skip a beat. I hadn't spent much time with Hector, yet he always gave me a sense of familiarity, as if there were many untold stories behind him. Although Adrian has more than once called him treacherous and cunning, after spending this period of time together, I do not think Hector is that kind of person. Nevertheless, I am fully aware that our relationship is merely one of mutual benefit, so I interrupted his somewhat flirtatious remark. "President Yan is joking. Even without me, you and Adrian would still be fighting each other. It's just that because of me, your fight will become even fiercer," I said coldly. Hector chuckled softly. "Yes, but precisely because of you, I will never give him another chance to turn the tables." As he spoke, he raised his glass to me. "Lena, as long as you want him to pay a painful price, I will definitely make it happen for you. What I want is for you to be happy." I looked at him without saying a word. The commercial war between Hector and Adrian has long been commonplace in everyone's eyes over the years, but recently their rivalry has become particularly intense. At first, no one understood why. It was not until Hector began bringing me to all kinds of banquets that people finally realized the reason. Recently I've snatched quite a few projects from Adrian. This time, he is determined to win the land in the city's West District. At the bustling banquet, Hector took me to a corner seat, declining those who approached to network with him, and casually placed a small cake in front of me. You barely ate anything at lunch, have something to tide you over first. I'll cook something for you when we get back. I stared at the cake without moving. Although he and I were indeed using each other for our own ends, during this time I could clearly feel how attentively Hector cared for me. Rather than saying I was merely a pawn in his campaign to defeat Adrian, our current relationship felt more like he was pursuing me. Yet this kind of relationship made me uneasy, for from the very beginning I had never intended to become deeply entangled with him. Thinking of this, I took a deep breath. Hector, do you treat every woman you keep this well? He froze for a moment, then grinned, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you, I've never kept any other woman before. What? Because I'm good to you, you're starting to fall for me? I gazed into his deep eyes, a ripple stirred in my heart, yet I stubbornly turned my head away. You're overthinking it. He gave a low chuckle, reached out to ruffle my hair, and said, if you told me you liked me, I would be delighted. Before I could respond, he glanced at his watch and continued, sit here for a bit. The bidding for the West District land is about to start. Wait for me. I'll win this round and make Adrian lose catastrophically. His face radiated the smile of someone assured of victory. With that, he turned and left. Watching his retreating figure, my heart was in turmoil. I kept feeling that there was some story about Hector connected to me, yet one I did not know. The bidding lasted far shorter than I had imagined. When I saw Hector surrounded by a crowd, walking toward me with a beaming smile, I knew he had succeeded. Yet even amidst so many people, his eyes held no one but me. As I watched him approach step by step, my heartbeat unconsciously quickened. Sorry to keep you waiting. Let's go home. Hector did not mention the final outcome. Instead, under everyone's gaze, he simply took my hand and headed toward the parking lot. Walking side by side, the smile never left the corners of his mouth. Unable to hold back, I asked, did you secure the West District land? Hector raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. What? Do I look like someone who would fail? In the past, he and Adrian had been evenly matched in such contests, but lately every piece of news I heard was either that he had won the project or that he had directly seized what was originally Adrian's. I fell silent. Just as he was opening the car door for me and we were about to get in, my name suddenly rang out across the vast parking lot. Lena. Hearing Adrian's voice, I froze and turned toward the sound. He looked far more haggard than the last time we met, completely devoid of his former air of refined elegance. He rushed over in a few large strides. The instant before Adrian could reach for my hand, Hector gripped my wrist and pulled me behind him. What is President Adrian doing? Lost a project and still not hurrying to find a new one? If things continue like this, it won't be long before I acquire the entire Adrian family. He looked at Adrian with disdain, his tone dripping with contempt. This time, however, Adrian ignored the provocation and focused entirely on me, his eyes never leaving my face. Lena, I have something to tell you. Hearing that familiar way of addressing me, for the first time I saw an unmistakable tenderness in Adrian's eyes. Yet I merely smiled indifferently. President Adrian, it seems there is nothing left to say between us, is there? Lena, I know you're still angry with me. But there's been a misunderstanding between us. During this time I've thought a lot and finally understood why he keeps taking my projects one after another. But none of that matters. What matters is that I have something very important to tell you. Ignoring Hector's attempt to stop him, he stepped past him, seized my hand, and looked at me pleadingly. Just give me a little time. I want to talk with you properly. This time Hector did not forcibly intervene. Instead, he gave a cold laugh, lowered his gaze to me, and asked in a seemingly casual tone, Lena, are you going with him? Though his tone was light, I could still detect the faint undercurrent of anger. I glanced at Hector, then turned to Adrian. In the end, I let go of Hector's hand. You go back first. There are indeed some things he and I still need to clarify. The black Bentley sped out of the parking lot. After hearing my answer, Hector suppressed his anger and departed. As he left, his lips parted several times as if he wanted to speak, yet ultimately he said nothing. Only Adrian and I remained in the surrounding area. I regained my composure and looked at him indifferently. But before I could speak, Adrian suddenly threw his arms around me, his voice brimming with irrepressible joy. Lena, I knew it, after 5 years of marriage, you would never choose him. I knew you still loved me. Ever since our last meeting, I've come to realize something. During those 5 years together, I had already unconsciously fallen in love with you. That's why, even when Tanya reappeared, I never touched her. I couldn't even muster any interest in her. I was merely trapped by those old memories. I'm sorry. I hurt you and I hurt Yo-Yo. Will you give me another chance? Listening to Adrian rattle off all these words, I found it utterly laughable. I pushed him away and asked icily, have you taken the wrong medicine? Or is it that Hector has tormented you so badly lately that you've run out of options and decided to pretend to be deeply in love, so I'll beg him to let you off? Faced with my speculation, the smile gradually vanished from Adrian's face, replaced by unmistakable sorrow in his eyes. Am I really that despicable in your eyes? That incapable of accepting defeat? I gave a contemptuous snort. Wrong, you're even more despicable than I imagined. As for whether you can accept defeat or not, you know perfectly well in your own heart. With that, I took a step back and continued to regard him coldly. Adrian, the reason I stayed is to tell you this. I will not rest until the day you are utterly ruined. Whether by getting close to Hector or to anyone else, I will exhaust every means to ensure you receive the retribution you deserve. I admit I do not possess the ability to destroy Adrian single-handedly. Yet no matter what methods I employ, as long as I achieve my goal, that too is my capability. Upon hearing my words, Adrian instantly deflated. Frowning, he gave a self-mocking laugh. Do you really hate me that much? I was wrong about what happened to Yo-Yo, but are you truly willing to disregard those 5 years we spent together? We were clearly happy during those 5 years, weren't we? Lena, can you really bear to treat me this way? Watching his display of deep affection, I felt only nausea. For the past 5 years, I had believed I occupied a place in his heart, but in reality Adrian is someone more skilled at pretense than anyone. As he himself said, perhaps he had unconsciously developed feelings for me. Yet the moment Tanya reappeared, he still chose to hurt me. If that is the case, I would rather he had treated me poorly from the very beginning. I drew a deep breath, raised my eyes to him, and said, no matter how much more you say, it changes nothing. In terms of our relationship, I do not hate you that intensely. Once love is gone, hatred fades as well. But regarding Yo-Yo, I will hate you for the rest of my life. After saying this, I turned to leave, but Adrian suddenly grabbed my hand and knelt before me, eyes filled with pleading. Lena, the house is filled with traces of you everywhere, yet when I return home, I can no longer see you. I looked down at him coldly and flung his hand away. Adrian, you really should get your brain checked. Because right now you're no different from someone with schizophrenia. This time I didn't hesitate, turned, and walked away. Behind me came the anguished, choking cries of Adrian rang out, Lena. Don't go. I truly know I was wrong. Is there really not even a shred of love left in you for me? His voice grew closer. I thought he was chasing after me, so I quickened my pace to leave the parking garage. The next second, a loud bang and the screech of emergency brakes tore through the air. I froze for a moment, then slowly turned around. Adrian lay on the ground in agony. The driver stepped out of the car still on the phone. Why were you running? Damn it, what bad luck. Hitting someone even in a parking garage, the driver continued to grumble intermittently. Yet all I saw was Adrian staring straight at me, still murmuring, Lena, don't go, listen to my explanation, give me one more chance. I swear. I'll never make you sad again. Regarding Adrian being hit by a car right in front of me, I merely glanced a few times before turning and leaving. I had intended to go home, but for some reason, once in the taxi I gave Hector's address. Only when the car stopped steadily in front of his house did I snap out of it and get out. Recently he often asked me to come over just to keep him company, doing nothing, simply staying at his place. Hector had registered my fingerprint for the lock, so I easily opened his front door. The living room remained as quiet and empty as ever, but this time the moment I entered I smelled a sharp stench of alcohol. Looking closer, I saw Hector slumped on the floor, surrounded by several empty bottles on the table and beside him. In all the time I've known him, even at business functions he never drank more than necessary. To see him this drunk now, I suspected it was because of me. "You're here?" He noticed me, turned his head, and asked softly. I walked toward him step by step, the doubt buried deep in my heart was about to burst forth. Before asking, I grabbed the half-finished bottle from the table and gulped down several mouthfuls. This time Hector didn't stop me, he only watched me silently. After half a bottle, a burning sensation suddenly flared in my stomach. It hurt, but it wasn't unbearable. Breathing slightly heavily, I didn't look at Hector. Did we know each other before? Otherwise I truly couldn't find a reasonable explanation for why he would care for and look after his arch-rival's ex-wife without the slightest hint of mockery. After a long silence, Hector reached out, took the half bottle from my hand, and finished it in one go. "Lena, have you really forgotten who I am completely?" I frowned at his words and turned to look at him. He smiled bitterly. "It seems you truly don't remember. 5 years ago at Nightshade Bar, it was your friend's birthday. You got drunk and clung to me, making me do something we shouldn't have. That was my first time with a woman." He paused, his smile bitter. "Afterward I wanted to take responsibility for you, but when I investigated and learned your identity, you were already married to Adrian. So I assumed you were just a loose woman. But after secretly approaching you again and again, I realized you weren't that kind of person at all. I couldn't explain what happened that night, yet I also couldn't bear to see you living happily with Adrian, so I opposed him at every turn and became his mortal enemy." He spread his hands. "Yet obviously I didn't want to bankrupt him and make your life too miserable either." I was momentarily speechless, unsure what to say. 5 years ago had also been my first time, but afterward I didn't know what to do, so I told no one and pretended nothing had happened. I never imagined that person would be Hector. He leaned closer, casually lifting a strand of my hair with his fingertip, and laughed self-deprecatingly. "You probably think it was just a fleeting encounter, nothing of consequence. But Lena, I don't know why, ever since that night I've been unable to stop myself from wanting to be near you. Every coincidental meeting was orchestrated by me, because I wanted you to know who I am, to know about that connection between us, enough." I abruptly cut him off, flushed with shame and anger. "I've forgotten everything about the past." "But I haven't." For the first time he shouted at me, eyes frighteningly red. "Lena, you were the one who clung to me first. Shouldn't you take responsibility for me?" The question rendered me speechless. I slowly looked at Hector and said softly, "Adrian won't be able to cause any more trouble for a while, consider this his punishment. But I think our relationship should end here." As soon as the words left my mouth, Hector let out a low, chilling laugh. The next second, he suddenly gripped my jaw, forcing me to meet his gaze. In a forceful tone he said, "Is there really anything about a man like that worth missing? Lena, if you truly hate him, I'm willing to let you use me for the rest of my life." As he spoke, he leaned in and gently kissed the corner of my lips. A tear instantly slid from his eye. "It's enough for me just to have you by my side." I was fully aware of how well Hector had treated me during this period, and it was precisely because I didn't know how to handle this relationship that I wanted to cut ties. Yet tonight the entire truth had come to light, and my emotions became incomparably complicated once more. I knew Hector would never harm me and might even treat me very well, but my heart was not yet ready to accept someone new. So I let out a long sigh, raised my eyes to him, and said, "Hector, even if I stay by your side only to use you against Adrian, would you still be like this?" At that he smiled softly, took my hand and pressed it to his cheek, his moist eyes gazing at me like a fawn's. "Lena, for 5 years I watched every detail of your life with him. Now you are finally by my side. Therefore, even if it's only exploitation, I accept it gladly. Hector and I settled into a subtle, ambiguous relationship. Yet he respected me fully and treated me extremely well. Gradually, my feelings toward him changed from what they had been at the beginning. During this time Adrian called me countless times and showed up at my door repeatedly. I always thought it was only temporary remorse. I never imagined he would persist so stubbornly. In the blink of an eye winter turned to spring, and another half-year passed. In this commercial war, Hector ultimately defeated Adrian, and soon the Adrian family declared bankruptcy. Only afterward did Hector tell me, I could have stopped short of total destruction, but whenever I thought of how he treated you, I couldn't help wanting him to pay the proper price. I had expected this all along, because he understood that unless Adrian suffered devastating punishment, the hatred in my heart would never fade. The day the Adrian family went bankrupt, I mustered the courage to visit Yo-Yo. Although she and I had spent only one short month together, she had left an indelible mark on my heart. As I walked out after seeing Yo-Yo, I immediately spotted Adrian approaching. He looked haggard and much older, his former glory was long gone. Lena, is this the ending you wanted to see? He stood beside me and gave a scornful smile. Fine. I wronged you, and I wronged Yo-Yo even more. I deserve this punishment. Suddenly choking up, he covered his face, voice hoarse, but I regret it so much. If I had realized my true feelings earlier, we would have been the happiest family in the world. I destroyed everything. It's all my own doing. I listened quietly to his confession and said without emotion, it's all in the past. You don't need to apologize to me. You should apologize to your daughter who was barely a month old and whom you hardly ever visited. After saying that, I started to walk away. Adrian suddenly grabbed my wrist. Hector is not a good man. Are you really going to spend your life with him? Before I could answer, my phone vibrated twice. The screen showed 2 photos from Hector. One was of the garden filled with peony flowers he had personally planted over the course of a week after I casually remarked, I like peonies, it would be nice to see a sea of them. The other was the dinner he was just finishing. He added the caption, Lena, dinner includes your favorite sweet and sour pork ribs. Come home early. Looking at the 2 photos, I smiled silently, shook off Adrian's hand, and walked away without a word. True feelings can change in an instant, no one can promise forever. But if the present is still happy, continuing like this with Hector is just fine.